Hi, everyone. I'm James with Pasona North America, and I'm here today to talk about jobs for Japanese majors. Now, here's kind of the high-level view of what we'll be talking about today. We'll start by talking a little bit about why companies are interested in bilingual candidates, specifically Japanese bilingual. Then we'll talk a little bit about the industries and roles where bilingual candidates are particularly desirable. Then a little bit about actual job hunting tips, and we'll follow it up with some Q&A about the questions that you sent in prior to this presentation. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about Pasona and what we do. Uh, we're a recruiting company that specializes in working with Japanese companies in the US. So as you can imagine, one of our strengths is helping companies find Japanese bilingual candidates. With all of the different Japanese companies that have branches in the US, and all of the American companies in the US that are either looking to do business with Japanese companies as suppliers or potentially as customers, we do get a lot of requests for bilingual candidates. So I want us to start out by, as bilingual candidates who are going to be looking for jobs, I think it is useful to start out by thinking about why companies might be interested in hiring you for your bilingual skills. And I'm going to share a little bit about why our clients come to us looking for bilingual candidates. And hopefully that can help you adjust your strategy when updating your resume or thinking about how you want to present yourself in interviews. So the first and most obvious reason why companies are looking for Japanese bilingual candidates is for their hard skills, their language skills, their ability to speak two different language, and also the cultural knowledge that comes with that sort of learning experience. If you have a Japanese business that's trying to break into the American market, it's extremely useful to have someone who speaks both languages. They can talk to the customers who probably don't speak Japanese, but also understands the local American market in a more intuitive way. This is also true going in the other direction. If an American company is trying to break into the Japanese market or wants to work with Japanese suppliers, then having a bilingual person on their team is immensely helpful for them. I'd say for Japanese companies in the US in particular, having bilingual workers, it plays a crucial role in having bridge builders. When you have a multilingual workforce, a multicultural workforce, there can be a tendency for people who speak the same language to kind of clump together and form different cliques. And this can lead to the different sides of the company viewing each other as rivals instead of as coworkers and collaborators, particularly when you're dealing with two cultures that have such different communication styles, like American communication and Japanese communication. So simply having someone around who can go to the Japanese side of the company and explain what the Americans are trying to communicate, or someone who can go to the American side of the company and explain what the Japanese side is trying to communicate, this is really essential to avoiding unintentional misunderstandings and having a collaborative atmosphere where everyone is able to contribute. And I want to stress, it's not just the language ability or the ability to know what words people are saying. ChatGPT is doing a great job with simple language, simple sentences, but it does a terrible job with understanding cultural nuance and what people are trying to communicate with the words they use. And it's that ability to understand the cultural context that goes with the language that in many ways makes bilingual candidates still very attractive. I also want to point out that there are many global companies that like to have workers with a global perspective and an intercultural perspective, even if the company doesn't regularly work with Japanese clients or Japanese suppliers. Having this experience of studying another language, doing a study abroad in a foreign culture, that can give you insight on how to work with people from backgrounds that are different than your own. And that in itself is a very important soft skill. If your company has a large, diverse workforce that has branches in a dozen different countries, this sort of soft skill is extremely important, even if we, take the specifics of the Japanese language out of the equation. Now, as important as language and cultural knowledge is to our clients and many companies like them, there are some second skills that, if you add them to language skills, will make your bilingual ability even more important. For example, let's say we have a Japanese major who has a minor in accounting or a double major in Japanese and accounting. They don't just have the language skills, the general language skills that, a bilingual candidate would have. They're able to talk to both sides of the company about the very specialized knowledge, the specialized concepts, the specialized vocabulary related to accounting, to the financial side of the company. And having someone who can sort of bring both sides of the company together about the money is extremely important. Same thing with a bilingual engineer, whether we're talking about mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, someone who understands the technology and can talk about these technical topics with both sides of the company and make sure everyone's on the same page. That person becomes very, very important to the day-to-day operations of that company. So I do think this is something to keep in mind when planning your education and what classes you're going to take. Language itself is extremely important, but it becomes particularly potent when you combine it with a second skill. All right, well, with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about some of the industries and roles where bilingual candidates are particularly attractive to companies. So first, talking about industries, I'm not going to spend too much time here. We only have so much time, and I want to focus a little more on the roles, but I do want to talk about a few of these industries. First of all, I would say that manufacturing, particularly automotive manufacturing, is probably the single biggest industry when it comes to Japanese companies in the US. I think a lot of the jobs and opportunities that are available are going to be in this space simply because there are so many companies that are involved with it. Another very big one is food and beverage. If you think about your local Japanese grocery store or your local ramen shop, they have to get their supplies from somewhere. Or do they get them? Well, they get them from a food and beverage maker. And with how popular Japanese food is and other Asian foods as well across the US, there are a lot of Japanese companies in the US that are in this industry. I'd say maybe the third biggest one is logistics. Because if you think about, okay, you make an engine for a car and you need to send it to the car maker, who's going to move that engine from one factory to the factory where it's being put in the car? Well, someone has to move it. That's the logistics company. If you think about food and beverage companies, who's going to bring the food that's being made in Japan and bring it over to the US and get it to the grocery store or the ramen shop? Logistics company have to arrange all of the import and export. So it has a very important supportive role to basically all of the other industries. I want to talk a little bit about entertainment because I get a lot of questions about it. There is a substantial Japanese entertainment space in the US, but it is also extremely competitive, especially if we're talking about creative roles or translation roles. A lot of people who get into studying Japanese do it because they're interested in Japanese pop culture. That's me as well. But because there are so many people who are interested in this industry, there's a lot of competition and the wages are relatively low. It is a very hard industry to break into. And even when you break into it, it's a hard industry to make a living in. So I don't say that to discourage you from getting involved with it, but if you want to be involved with it in a creative capacity or translation capacity, I do want you to know up front, it is a very long, rough road. Although there are other roles that are a little bit easier to get into. All right, well, let's talk about some of the specific roles that might be suitable for bilingual candidates. And I want to start by talking about sales. Sometimes called business development, sometimes called account management. And I want to start with this one specifically because many candidates are not interested in it at first. I think for many of us, when we think about sales, it has kind of a negative connotation. We think about door-to-door salespeople. We think about used car salespeople, people who engage in this kind of high-pressure sales tactics, have kind of a slimy image. It does have certain associations. However, when we talk about the type of sales that bilingual candidates are doing, we're talking very specifically about business-to-business sales. We talked about engines going in cars earlier. Well, if you think about Toyota or Honda, they don't make their own engines. Other companies make the engines and they sell them to Toyota and Toyota and Honda put them in the cars. Now, can Toyota make a car without an engine? No, they can't. They have to buy that engine from somewhere. And this is the type of sales we're talking about. It's not high pressure. It's about building a bridge with the other company, making sure that your company and their company are on the same page about the technical requirements and the delivery schedule, and bringing the companies together to have a mutually satisfying agreement that is a benefit to both parties. It's not, if you go into this type of sales and try to do the high pressure tactics, you're not going to get very far. One other thing I think is important about sales roles for bilingual candidates, this is probably one of the highest paying things you can do if you don't have a STEM degree. There are not enough bilingual salespeople in the US. They are always hiring. If this is something you are interested in, it is a great way to get to know the company and its operation. And it's important to pretty much every industry where there are Japanese companies in the US. Next, I want to talk a little bit about purchasing and supply chain, which are very closely related. Because purchasing is kind of reverse sales. So the engine maker, they have salespeople who are trying to sell to Toyota. Toyota has purchasing people who are doing negotiation on the other side. One thing that I think is very good about purchasing is that maybe if you're not extroverted enough to do sales successfully, you can have something similar by working in purchasing, but there's more of a focus on the data analysis and production planning side. So if you like working with numbers, you like dealing with schedules, you like making sure that everyone's on the same page, but you want something a little less people-focused than sales, purchasing is a great option. It's most important to the manufacturing, food and beverage, and trading, import-export industries. The financial industry, it's maybe not so important. But one of the advantages is that bilingual candidates are highly desirable and there's no specific degree that's required. You can get degrees in logistics, a minor in business wouldn't hurt, but you don't need to have those type of degrees in order to get an entry-level role. Next, translation and interpretation. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this because you already know what it is. I just have a few comments that might help you if you're interested in this type of role. And the main thing I want to communicate to you is that specialists make more money. If you have knowledge of legal terminology and legal concepts, or financial terminology and financial concepts, or engineering, if you have an understanding of some sort of technical field, you will make more money. So even if you want to focus on the language side, it can still be good to take a few classes in a different field, maybe get a minor in a different field, just so that you can pitch yourself as a specialist translator. Most of the positions we see in translation are in the manufacturing industry. That's in part because it's such a big industry and because you have so many big companies where there's management from Japan and local workers, and so naturally there's much more of a need for translation. I'd say for this type of role, it is best to have a degree in Japanese, but I also recommend that you pass the N2 level of the Japanese language proficiency test as well, since that will help show companies that you are serious and that you do have the linguistic ability to succeed in this type of role, even if you don't have any prior experience. Next, accounting and finance. We already talked about this a little, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. I just want to point out again that this is one of the most crucial roles for bilingual people because they keep the money right. And what's more important to a business than the money? We see roles for this in pretty much every industry. I know right now there is definitely a lack of bilingual accountants in the US. So if you do get some experience with this, even if you just take a few classes, that will make you very, very attractive as a candidate. Now, specific degrees are very often required for accounting and finance. So I think this is a very good one if you want to double major. But you'll sometimes see entry-level roles where you're doing, accounts payable and accounts receivable, where you can get in just as a bilingual candidate. Similarly, we touched on why engineering is so important before. Well, because if there's anything more important than money at a company, it might be the product that you're selling to get that money. Mechanical engineering and electrical engineering are the two specific degrees that we see the most demand for. Most of the roles where they're looking for a bilingual engineer, they are going to need a double major. And in terms of industries, manufacturing is, of course, huge, but we also see a lot of demand from energy companies, especially with how green energy is growing in the US right now. That's also very important to the Japanese market, and then construction companies. Information technology. This one's a very difficult market right now in the US. There was a lot of overhiring of IT professionals during COVID when IT was perhaps the most important job in the world at that point after healthcare workers, since everyone was working via Zoom. But unfortunately, a lot of IT companies have been having layoffs recently, and so getting an entry-level role is extremely difficult. The one exception that I see, at least, if you are a bilingual candidate, you have a shot at those entry-level positions in a way that people who only speak English just don't have the same opportunities right now. Most of what we see is software engineering, specifically for business-to-business software as a service. So the software that logistics companies will use to track shipments, or the software that financial institutions will use to make transactions. Cybersecurity is also very important to that financial market. For this, a specific degree or boot camp or professional experience is usually required. But if you are bilingual, like I said, you do have a very clear advantage over other candidates. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about human resources and recruiting. This is also extremely important in manufacturing because, as we said, you have the managers and upper management are very often on assignment from the home office in Japan, and you have a lot of blue-collar workers working under them that might not care so much about adapting to Japanese culture and the Japanese way of doing things. They just want to do their jobs and get their paycheck. And that can make communication very difficult. So for this reason, a lot of Japanese manufacturers will hire bilingual candidates to be in human resources roles. And often it'll be a combination translation, interpretation, and HR role. It's very important to have people who have an understanding of the local culture, the local labor laws, the local standards for benefits programs, and can kind of help management navigate this task that they're not necessarily prepared for by their home company. I'd say this is important in every industry, just because of the system of assigning people from the home office to run local branches. But manufacturing is probably the biggest one. Now, specific degrees in human resources are sometimes required, but not always. And this is also a field where there are a lot of certifications you can get in order to get some of those entry-level roles. Next, now that we've talked about the jobs, let's talk about actually getting those jobs. So a lot of candidates will ask me, what's the timeline for getting a job with a Japanese company? The answer is it depends. If you're a Japanese major and you've passed the N2 level of the JLPT and you're willing to relocate anywhere in the US, I can probably find you a job somewhere between 1 to 3 months. However, if you are only looking for jobs in Michigan, or you're trying to get an 80K salary right out of college, or you only have N3 level Japanese and you're only looking at remote positions, if you have a lot of conditions and must-haves, it can be more like 3 to 6 months. And if you have some unrealistic ones, it can be even longer, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. So I want to encourage you, when you're thinking about the types of position that you're looking for, you need to focus on what's most important. Most people don't get their dream job directly out of college. Usually you got to build your career to that point. So you need to start by thinking about, what is the direction I want to move in, and what are the experiences, the professional experiences that are going to get me there. That will help you narrow down your job search to things that are actually going to be a good fit, because you will get those things which are actually most important to you. This is kind of what a perfect world application process looks like. I'm not going to go through all the steps one by one, since I think all of this is going to look pretty familiar. Instead, I want to focus on giving some tips for various parts of the process. First of all, I'd say after you put in your application with a company, when you're doing that job search, you're in that mode, get used to checking your email every day. If you get phone calls from numbers you don't recognize, go ahead and pick up the phone. If there's a company that's interested in reaching out to you, they're going to call you, they're going to text you, they're going to email you. But if you don't pick up or don't get back to them in a timely manner, they're going to assume you're not available anymore and move on to the next candidate. This goes throughout the interview process as well. When you're getting emails from the company trying to set up interviews, respond to those emails within 24 hours, 48 hours in a pinch. Anything longer than that, and you're really risking that they're going to move on to the next candidate. One other thing that's worth mentioning, this is for more traditional Japanese companies, they're only going to want to talk about your salary at 2 points in the process. When you put in your application, they're going to ask what your desired salary is, and you should put it in there. And then when you get through the interviews and you're in the negotiation phase, you get an offer letter, then it's okay to talk about salary again. I do not recommend talking about salary in the interviews themselves, especially with Japanese companies. It can come off as you're only interested in what you're getting out of the position and not what you can contribute to the company. So yeah, keep it to the beginning of the process and the end of the process. One other thing worth mentioning, when you get the offer letter, you need to respond to that within 24 hours. You don't necessarily need to accept it, though. It's perfectly acceptable to say, hey, thank you very much for this offer. I'm very excited. Can I have a few days to think about it? Can I have 1 week to think about it? Anything more than 1 week is getting in kind of iffy. I'd say a few days or 1 week, most companies are going to be fine with that. And if they're not fine with that, it's potentially a red flag. But you do need to respond to them to let you know you've received it and you are considering it, so that they don't just move on to the next candidate. Finally, with the background check, when you get to the background check, you are going to need to fill out some forms, give them some information so they can start the background check. You also want to do this as soon as possible, because until you submit that information, the company can't start doing the background check. And there are a lot of people who aren't going to be able to do their part of the process until they have that information. Background checks are not automatic. They are not fast. If they need to contact your references, then they need to find a time when they can talk to them. And if they're waiting for that information, then they can't do their part of the job, and you might not be able to start your job on time. Don't wait until the last minute. Fill out that information as soon as possible so that everyone can do their part. Next, just a few things to keep in mind. Professionalism in the process really matters a lot, and that includes keeping a professional appearance. Japanese companies in particular like to see you wearing a suit and tie or a pantsuit or something like that. You want to dress up, you want to go business formal. Additionally, you want to have a nice clean haircut. You want to look very well groomed. Uh, I have a beard right now and I work for a Japanese company, but if I was interviewing for positions, I'd probably shave my beard. I get comments from my coworkers every now and then about how big and bushy my beard is, which personally I don't feel it's that bushy, but there are different cultural standards in different environments. Next, we already talked about this, but timely responses matter. And I just want to repeat that because if there's anything that I see recent graduates stumbling with, this is one of the big ones. Uh, you need to make your interest in the position very clear by responding to communication in a timely manner. Next, the total package matters. If there's a second thing I see recent graduates struggling with, it's this. Uh, there is a tendency to only look at the salary number. And while that is extremely important, if you aren't making enough money to pay rent and buy groceries, then that's not a good offer. But you also need to keep the benefits in mind. Japanese companies tend to have very strong benefits packages, especially in terms of the percentage of the healthcare that they pay for. Most companies, they'll either pay 100% of your healthcare cost, for the insurance, or 90% is paid by the company and 10% is paid by you, 80% by the company, 20% by you. Whereas with American companies, you do get some that are in that high level range, but you also get a lot where 0% of the insurance cost is paid by the company, or 50% of the insurance cost is paid by the company. And when you're talking about things in that range, that can be a difference of, $10,000, $20,000 a year, depending on the type of package and the details. 401k programs, especially if they're matching contributions, that is extremely huge. That is free money. That is tax-free money. Uh, you're young now, you're just getting started out, but if you start saving for retirement now, compound interest is a huge deal, and you will achieve financial independence a lot sooner if you have that type of benefit. So don't just absolutely look at the salary, but also look at the total benefits package because the details really do matter when it comes to your financial independence. Finally, we already touched on this a little, but you need to approach your first job after college as a move in the right direction. Hey, if you do get your dream job right out of college, that's wonderful. I'm very jealous of you. But, for the 99% of us that don't, you need to think about how you want your career to develop, what type of professional experiences you need to get in order to get to the career you want to have. So again, focus on the things that are most important to you. Focus on getting the right type of experience so you can develop yourself professionally, and you're going to have a much longer, much healthier, much more stable career. All right, Q&A and contact. I'm going to go ahead and answer the questions that were submitted. And I do also want to say I'm going to give you my contact information at the end. Feel free to reach out if you have additional questions. Even if you're not looking for jobs right now, if you have questions about, what type of courses you should take or how you might think about developing your career, feel free to reach out. I also studied Japanese in college. I was a Japanese major, and there are a lot of things that I wish people had told me, and I'm happy to tell those things to you. And also that way, when you are looking for jobs and you come to me, it'll be easier for me to find you a job and it'll be one that pays better. So it's win-win. All right. Are there many Japanese companies or jobs that require Japanese language in the United States and the Midwest? Short answer, yes. Long answer, yes, 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 yes. The automotive industry, the manufacturing industry are huge in the Midwest, and a huge part of that industry is companies headquartered in Japan. This is not just automotive manufacturers. These are all the companies that supply them and the companies that supply them and the logistics companies that grow up around that and the import-export industry, the trading industry that grows up around that. There are so many opportunities, and I'd say especially in the Midwest. Is it hard finding a job where you can use your skills? Well, yes and no. I assume we're talking about language skills here. If you really want to get a job that utilizes your language skills directly out of college, I would say one of the most important things is to pass the N2 level of the Japanese language proficiency test. That is the point at which a lot of companies are going to be very interested in talking to you about bilingual positions. If you can pass the N3 level, that's also good. Uh, that would be more for positions where you're just going to be using Japanese internally in the office. But we do get a lot of positions like that, especially sales positions, purchasing, logistics, food and beverage. There are a lot of jobs where simply, even if your Japanese isn't the best, if you can hold a conversation, if you can talk about work topics, yeah, we can find you a job. I'm majoring in Japanese language and minoring in general business. Am I able to do something with that? Or would it be recommended I turn my major into international trade and language? That's a great question. I will say this will partially depend on what you're hoping to do with your career. So if you want to discuss this in more detail, feel free to reach out. That being said, you will be able to do something with that. Having Japanese language plus that second skill of general business, that is going to make you attractive for a lot of roles, especially if you want to pitch yourself primarily on the strength of your language skills. If you really want to focus on positions where you'll be using the Japanese language a lot, I'd say where you are right now is where you want to be. If you want to pitch yourself more as on the strength of your business skills and maybe less so on the strength of your language skills, international trade and language would probably be good for that. Uh, but beyond that, I'd say it really just depends on what you think you want to do with your career. So, yeah, if you want to discuss in more detail, feel free to reach out. Would it be beneficial or recommended to take the Japanese language proficiency test along with the business Japanese language test? Yes. Now, my advice here is to start by focusing on the Japanese language proficiency test, for the simple reason that more Japanese companies know what that is. There are a surprising amount of Japanese companies that are not as familiar with the BJLT, so it doesn't carry as much weight. But so maybe start by passing the N3 or the N2, and then after that, look into the business Japanese language test. Are dialects considered when speaking Japanese in the workplace? Yes and no. I'd say most workplace conversations tend towards the more formal Japanese, which means most people are speaking in the more standard Tokyo dialect. However, it is very common that you'll have coworkers or customers that have a regional dialect. And if you want to talk to them, then being able to understand those dialects is extremely important. It can also be fun, if you know the Kansai dialect or the Osaka dialect, and you have a coworker from that area, it can be fun to talk in it with them. I will say, however, that the formal keigo, sonkeigo, that's more important. Being able to speak in that and write in that is more important than being able to speak or write in a regional dialect. Although understanding a regional dialect, that is, yeah, very useful. Is honorary language utilized often in the workplace? Yes. And the better you are at it, the better positions you're going to be able to get. Especially if it's a position where you're interacting a lot with customers, you absolutely need to use honorary language. If you're just using it internally with the company, it's not as important. But I'd say, I mentioned things I wish people had told me when I was studying Japanese. I wish I could go back and tell myself to spend more time studying the honorary language, the honorifics, the keigo, because I ended up having to study it anyway, and I could have started out on a stronger foot. What knowledge of Japanese is required when applying to Japanese operated businesses? I'd say if you have the N3 level, then that's going to be a plus with companies in the Midwest. If you're looking for jobs in California or New York, N3 isn't going to go as far. There are a lot more Japanese speakers in that places, so that's not going to be as compelling. N2 is where companies really start to get interested, especially if it's a bilingual role where you will be talking in Japanese a lot, and especially if you're going to be interacting with customers. So for a more internal position, N3 is good, but for more external facing positions, you really, really, really want to get N2. Do you get opportunities to travel to Japan within the companies? Yes, but it depends on the role and it depends on the industry. For example, I'd say salespeople and engineers probably get to travel to Japan the most, as well as bilingual accountants. That's also up there, because they want these people, because they're so important to the operations of the business, to get experience with the headquarters as well and see how they do things there, and then take that information back to the US branch so they can kind of make sure that everyone's on the same page. Other roles like customer service or administrative assistant, you're not going to get as many opportunities. Do you get the opportunity to be a translator depending on your speaking/listening comprehension? Well, no and yes. No, because there are some positions that are 100% translation, where you're only dealing with written documents and emails or things like that. And for those positions, speaking and listening doesn't really matter. However, most of those pure translation positions are contract-based or temp-based. Most companies don't have enough translation work that needs to be done that they can justify hiring a full-time permanent employee to do just that. If you're looking for permanent full-time positions, then you need to be both a translator and an interpreter and be able to interpret spoken conversations as well. And in that case, yes, your speaking and listening comprehension absolutely do matter. All right, well, that's all the questions that were submitted. So I'll go ahead and leave you with my contact information. And like I said before, even if you're not ready to start looking for positions yet, if you do have questions or just kind of want to pick my brain, feel free to reach out. I love talking to students and helping them plan their careers, figure out what they want to do after they graduate. It's why I got into this industry to begin with. So thank you very much for listening and good luck out there.